Hey, how you doing? Yeah, it's Tuesday, not Monday, I know. I totally lost track of time. But I'm sure it's fine. I'll be back to Monday next week. As usual, the video's divided into 3 parts. Let's begin. The first one's about Hyrja. This one's not really any news. It was shared quite a while ago by Naowh, one of the MDI contestants. In this clip, my tank first takes the boss to the light side, making sure she gets only 1 stack of light. Then after that, my tank pulls the boss to the middle, empowering the boss by both sides. The boss would then open with Sanctify, rather than Lightning Storm. At this point, the boss will build up stacks of both buffs. Don't worry, this is all part of the plan, it's not a disaster. My tank then takes the boss to the lightning side, allowing the boss to start building up more lightning stacks. But when the boss does her frontal, the tank uses this to bring the boss back to the light side. The key bit here is that when the boss goes back to the light side, you want the boss's electric buff to be higher than her light buff. If her thunder buff is higher than her holy buff, when she casts her ultimate, she will cast Lightning Storm. And if done right, she will cast Lightning Storm on the light side. It's a pretty cool trick, but we're on the last few weeks of Season 1, so there really isn't too much use for these tricks. The second trick is in Azure Vaults. This one's to do with Spell Reflect. If you were paying attention earlier in the season, you might have noticed this. All warriors have an ability called Spell Reflect. While you can taunt and Spell Reflect on DPS classes, it's a bit risky, so this normally only applies to tank warriors. So the first boss and the last boss have tank busters. And as a tank, if you Spell Reflect right before the tank buster goes on you, you take literally no damage. That is a lot of damage you're just mitigating for free. On the first boss, you can mitigate every tank buster, and on the last boss, you can mitigate every other tank buster. This is really good, and this is partially what made Prot Warrior so strong earlier in the season. Of course, Prot Warrior isn't as popular these days, Prot Paladin is a lot more popular. But if you have a Protection Warrior as your tank, this is still quite handy to know. And finally, this last trick isn't to do with the dungeon, but rather to do with your dungeon Keystone. Myself and most of my guild have been going hard on keys this week, trying to get 23s and 24s done. That's because we want 20 keys when the season starts, so we can get good gear. The reason we're doing 23s at least is because when the season starts, your keys will lose 3 key levels. Or at least, historically, that's how it's been. For example, if I have a Ruby Life Pool's 23 key, and I time it, I should get a 20 key when the season starts next season. And 20 is the goal. You want the best loot you can get from the Great Vault. And given it's a new season with new dungeons and our gear level goes down, you really shouldn't expect to be able to push keys so early in the season. So if you really want to be efficient, really push out these last few keys on these last few weeks of Season 1. You can either time a 23 or untime a 24. Your choice. Of course, this only really matters the week before the season starts, so that'll be the week of May 2nd. You don't really have to do super high keys now yet, but my guild is trying to plan ahead and try and get as many keys as we can, so that we can have a good number of players on our roster who have 20 keys. That's all for the tech talk, and now let's talk about balance changes and tuning over the past week. First, and probably biggest, is another stamina buff to all players, and following it is also a large damage buff on enemies. I think it's a great change. I praised them when they changed it earlier this season. They increased our stamina by 40% earlier this season, but they increased it by 25% this time on PTR. Hopefully this means the enemies will be less bursty in general in future dungeon tuning. Of course, if there are no dungeon tuning done with this, there is no effective change. As a matter of fact, it might be a slight nerf to healers overall. So hopefully, Blizzard is on top of it. There was quite a bit of class tuning recently, very specifically to Mage. Mages have been crying for changes, and while there are no mechanical changes to most mages, there are number tuning. Fire Mage gets a number of buffs, and they look to be quite strong. Combustion gives more mastery from crit, and some of their damage abilities get some nice buffs. Arcane Mage gets a few increased to duration for some of their abilities. I think it's going to help a lot. When I played Arcane Mage earlier this season, I felt like some abilities were just too short, and I think 2 seconds on a few of them is a great change. Frost Mage is going to get a few number buffs. I don't play Frost Mage at all. I would not touch it with a 10-foot pole. So if you play it yourself, you can look at these numbers and determine if these are good changes. Unholy DK got a few buffs. Druids got a few buffs. There was some tuning to Holy and Shadow Priest. Some of these changes aren't too notable. But there was quite a reasonable number buff to Elemental Shaman. And God knows they need it. I mean, they can be quite weak in certain scenarios. Hopefully they're stronger next season. This next one's interesting. On PTR, there's a new enchantment. This one's meant basically only for healers. When casting healing spells and abilities, you can occasionally grant an ally 1367 secondary stat. Their highest, of course. It looks very promising, and I'm definitely using it on my healer. I would absolutely not be surprised if all healers end up using it next season. Though I am unsure of how it'll look like on the leaderboard rankings. We all know how controversial Power Infusion is on the leaderboards. People feel jealous that they can't get the highest parse because they didn't get buffed by PI. Well, this one looks to be basically a mini PI that's random. I cannot wait for the shit show that will ensue. And lastly, a few smaller details that I won't go too deep into. There were a few balance changes for Freehold. It looks like Freehold will be quite different from how it used to be in BFA, so that's going to be something to look forward to. Some more dungeon tuning for the other dungeons as well, just small things here and there, and there were some nerfs to the trinkets as well. Specifically, the puzzle box and the rage feather. The puzzle box will have its number reduced and its duration increased, and rage feather will just do 10% less damage flat. This is obviously done so that we're not using these trinkets throughout the season next season, and I think that's fair enough for Blizzard. I expect a few more nerfs for other trinkets when the patch actually comes out. Okay, well, now we're on the portion about me. I helped a few guildies get their last portals, it was great. I think most of my guildies have all their portals. I did my best ever key this week, it felt really good. It was a 23 ruby life pools as a disc priest. I was really proud of that run, we did really well and we only had one death. It was super clean. And I recorded it. I will be uploading it. Unfortunately, it turns out for the entire run, I was muted. So you won't hear my amazing voice for that video. But it was so good and we did so well, I'm going to upload it anyway. As mentioned in the earlier tech talk, there's a big rush to complete keys in my guild. I myself have managed to get all 23s at least done for all my characters. Mostly untimed 24s, but of course the 23 timed ruby on my priest, and a 23 timed Shadow Moon Barrel Grounds on my demon hunter. Those runs can be quite stressful, things hit really hard at that level. But despite that, they were still quite fun. It felt good to do high keys even though you don't time them. My guild is planning thoroughly for the next season, getting the roster up, making sure everyone's ready for it. And it looks like I'm playing Fire Mage yet again. Because nobody's playing Mage in our guild. It's not like I don't like playing Mage, Mage is cool, it's fun, but I'm far more comfortable on my Discipline Priest. That said, Fire Mage is still looking quite strong, so at least I'll be strong when I'm playing Mage. I managed to snag really good recording sessions of Brackenhide Hollow, Uldaman, Neltharis, Vortex Pinnacle, and Neltharian's Lair. That's quite a few already, and I think I can now begin recording my narration and editing the videos. I expect to upload at least 2 of them in the coming week, so stay tuned. That's all for my week in WoW. Thanks for watching, and if you like this, do leave a like or subscribe, and I will see you next week for my weekly recap.